Well, okay, I'd like to get started with our continuing study of the URC. And last time we kind of began talking about the Trinity Psalter Hymnal, and I'm in the process of giving you some of the history of it and how it came about. And today we're going to continue that history and see that, it was not a straight line from the decision to the end, but there was a lot of curves along that way. And so we're going to notice that as we look at this today. And part of this comes in from the broader conversation of worship, okay? So we've been talking about worship for a little while now, and why we worship the way we do. And of course, music is a part of our worship, and so naturally we're talking about the Trinity Psalter Hymnal. Last time I said that in 1997. So this is the second synod of the URC. They decided to appoint a committee to do some research and to come back with a recommendation to either produce, reproduce, or obtain a Psalter hymnal. And the committee did come back in 1999, which is the following synod, and recommended that the URC begin the process of producing its own book, Psalter Hymnal. However, the committee also said that's going to take a while, and churches that are singing out of the blue Psalter Hymnal. I'm going to use that term, blue Psalter Hymnal, but what that is that's the Psalter Hymnal that most of our churches use in the CRC. Okay, it's a CRC hymnal, copyrighted by the CRC, which is called Faith Alive, copyrighted by them and such. So we also recommended that we approach the CRC asking if we can print more copies of the blue Psalter hymnal. And Synod agreed to both of those decisions. Okay, so this is where I kind of stopped last time. But Synod agreed to both of those decisions. Yes, let's move forward to produce our own Psalter hymnal. But in the meantime, we're going to do a reprint of the blue Psalter hymnal. So that's where we're at. And so then Synod added members to that committee for producing the Psalter hymnal. So I was on the 1997 committee that did the research and came with recommendations. And then I continued on that committee, and others joined in. Others like Mike Horton, actually. Mike Horton was originally, or early on, part of this committee and of the Psalter hymnal. I think he lasted maybe 2 years and then he got off. But by his choice, not because we kicked him off, anything like that. So anyway, yes.
Were you ever involved in the CRC one? Or like the Faith Alive?
Was I ever involved in that? Well, no, it was, so that was, well, not in its production. I was involved in the reprinting.
Okay.
Very involved in the reprinting. I was the point guy because I lived in the Grand Rapids area, and so I would go to the offices and talk to the people. But so I was the point guy for that. But no, because the blue Psalter hymnal, we had the 76 edition, I think is what we used, but that was pretty much a straight-on reprint of the 50-something, which preceded me. So no, I was not involved in any production of the blue Psalter hymnal. So in 2001, so Synod typically has been meeting every other year. So that's why I'm jumping years, just because that's the next Synod. Okay, so Synod 2001, they approved setting up a Psalter hymnal fund. How are we going to pay for this thing? When the committee meets, the committee is paid. Their through synodical funds, you might say, or denominational funds. But when we get to the point where we need to approach a printer, and that printer needs $60,000 in order, how are we going to, what are we going to do with that, right? So the URC decided that they were going to open or start a Psalter hymnal fund. At that synod, the 2001, at that synod also what happened is the synod approved of entering into phase 2 status of ecumenicity with the Canadian Reformed churches. There's a lot of conversation we could have about that in particular, but let me just say, backing up, and for explanation, we intentionally named ourselves the United Reformed Churches, not only because our interest was that, our local churches would come together and be united in a federation, but also with a desire to reach out and give expressions of unity with other Reformed and Presbyterian denominations. And so for both of those reasons, we chose the name United Reformed Churches. And at that point, probably, at least for many in the URC, the sense was that our closest sibling denominationally is the Canadian Reformed Churches. And I would say that there were quite strong voices saying we need to just merge, need to just unite with them, merge with them, and be one denomination rather than two separate, a federation denomination. So we moved to phase 2, which is significantly closer to in ecumenicity with the Canadian Reformed Churches, and the Synod also decided that, quote, our songbook committee would work together with the Canadian Reformed Church Book of Praise Committee toward a joint songbook which would include all 150 settings of the Genevan Psalms. Okay, so now I have to explain a little more. I should have brought the Canadian Reformed Book of Praise. Have any of you ever sung out of the Book of Praise? The Canadian Reformed Book of Praise? Okay, 1, 2 of you maybe. The Book of Praise has 150 psalms, not, Psalm 100A, Psalm 100B, Psalm 100C. It has 150 psalms, period, and they are all the Genevan Psalms, okay? Plus they have, or did at least, I'm not sure today, but they did have about 70 hymns that were approved, and everything has to be approved by their synod. Okay, so that's what it was. So they are committed to singing the 150 Genevan Psalms. How many of you are familiar with the Genevan Psalter? So our doxology that we sang, praise God from whom all bless, that's actually the Genevan Psalm 100. So written in 15 or 1600 something, okay? Calvin and his consistory commissioned a few guys to put the Psalms into music. The thing is, music in that time, it's quite a bit different than music in our day. It's much more, follows the Gregorian chant kind of to our ears. If you look at Genevan Psalms, you're going to see that typically the first note is going to be a half note, like praise God from whom. The first note is longer, and then da-da-da. And you're going to find that to be the case in the Genevan Psalters, the Genevan Psalms. and there's a number of other things I can say. They have different modes, and those modes sound quite odd to our ears. We have major and minor, right? We get that. We understand kind of that concept. But they have like several different modes, and it sounds odd to us. A lot of them sound very minor to us, those modes. And so anyway, nonetheless, so I'm just putting that out there for now, and not even telling you what I think about that, but I'm putting that out there, that Synod, 2001, told us to work together with the Canadian Reformed Book of Praise Committee to come together to put a book, and that book would have all 150 Genevan tunes in it, 150 Genevan psalms. So that was the decision of Synod 2001. I will say this, apart from what I think about the 150 Genevan psalms, I voted against this. Now, I'm on the committee, but I was also a delegate to that synod, and I voted against it. And I also voted against the movement toward the Canadian Reformed Church. Not because I don't think it's a good idea, but because I felt like this is going too top down, it's going too fast. People are not going to embrace this. It's not. So now is not a good idea, was the reason that I personally voted against it. And that proved to be actually the case. And so we'll see that. So for several years, we worked together with the Canadian Reformed Book of Praise Committee. That was our mandate. We were told to do that, and so we did as a committee. I was living in Michigan, but several times I would drive across the border into Canada and meet with their committee, along with the other members of our committee. In 2007, so I'm jumping here, but I'm just focusing more on what's happening with the Trinity Psalter Hymnal. In 2007, Synod received an overture that the songbook that we are working on would be a URC songbook. So this was kind of like backing us off a bit, right? And the concern behind that was that the URC, in our history, we sing some Genevan psalms. We got some in the Trinity Psalter Hymnal. But we're not committed to all 150 Genevan psalms, and in fact, probably don't want it. Okay, that was kind of the thinking in 2007 for that overture, and Synod approved that overture. So now we were in a very weird situation for a few years, where we were meeting with the Canadian Reformed Church Book of Praise Committee. But the book we're working on is our own book. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, does this mean we're doing two books? What is all this, what's going on here? And so it was very difficult for us as a committee to know exactly what to do. Yeah. Yes, well, yeah, sort of. So the question is, we didn't want the Genevan Psalms. Is it because of the structure of in a sense, yes. I mean, first of all, we're committed to psalm singing. It's the Genevans that was the concern, with all of those strange the modality of the tunes. We didn't think that was very helpful. We're very worshipful, and it was historically that was not a part of who we were, as United Reformed churches. We were not committed to the 150 Genevan tunes like the Canadian Reformed were committed to them. Okay, and so again, it's not that we're against them. It's we didn't want to be mandated that all 150 need to be included. So I think we have about 20-something in the Trinity Psalter Hymnal of the tunes, yeah.
Can you articulate the argument
Why they only? Yeah, that I there have been arguments made. I'm not sure how good those arguments are, that the Genevan tunes actually are can go back to Jewish music, so that there's a line from the Jewish music of the Psalms in the Old Testament that can be drawn directly to the Genevan tunes. I'm not convinced of that argument, okay, but nor do I want to say that that would be their only argument. I'm not sure that is, but yeah. So we were in this little kind of weird place where, okay, we're supposed to make our own book. It seems the URC isn't so interested in all 150 Genevan tunes included in the book, but we're still working with the Canadian Reformed. In 2010, so for some reason we went 3 years there instead of 2, but in 2010, that synod instructed our committee that the joint work with the Canadian Reformed churches is concluded. That we are no longer, being asked to work with the Canadian Reformed Book of Praise Committee. So in 2007, Synod kind of took a little half step back. In 2010, it was a full step. We're not doing this. There was just too much concern, too much unrest. And again, I think that, we pushed something too quickly. On the URC, the people in the pews were not ready for that. And several of us who were on, clergy and otherwise were not all for it either. So that synod really just said, don't work with the Canadian Reformed Book of Praise anymore. We want our committee to work on our book, period. So for me, that was a huge relief. Okay, good. Now let's get moving. The Synod also adopted the following, quote, that Synod 2010 affirmed the production of an official songbook which will be purchased and used by all URCNA churches. Now that's an interesting declaration by Synod, and has been the subject of some discussion as to what exactly does that mean. It is not understood as a mandate that churches must purchase the finished product because it's the official. I mean, it can be read that way. It kind of seems to indicate that. But Synod typically doesn't want to do that, make those kind of statements. But nonetheless, this one did, and said that Synod affirmed the production of an official songbook, which will be purchased and used by all URCNA churches. The grounds were, this is in keeping with Synod 97's decision to appoint a Psalter Hymnal Committee. B, an official songbook for all the churches will promote unity, identity, and well-being of the federation. C, this would keep the cost of producing the songbook to a minimum. And D, this would give a positive impetus to the project on which the committee has spent thousands of hours and reviewed over 2,000 songs. So basically, Synod was saying, we want this committee to work on our own songbook, and we're behind you. That's really what they're doing. We're behind you. Yeah.
So is there much discussion on using the existing Psalter?
Yeah, that was the discussion we had in 1999, looking at what was out there. I would say the conclusion that our committee had and that Synod, I think, had was that, one, we wanted a Psalter hymnal, which limited it, because there are Psalters out there, quite a few actually, and obviously there's a lot of hymnals out there, but Psalter hymnals, there's fewer of those to look at. But those that were out there, we found were lacking in different ways. Again, not part of our history, songs that people didn't know. These kind of things were the reasons I would say that. But Psalter hymnals, there just weren't that many to choose from. So I would say that would be why. In that, after 2010, we got to work just as our committee, and we found out soon after that that the OPC had decided to appoint a committee to work on a Psalter hymnal, specifically a Psalter hymnal. In other words, a hymn book that had the 150 Psalms as well as good hymns. So the OPC appointed a committee to do that. This is way after the URC had appointed our committee. So all of this stuff that we've been doing, the OPC hadn't been doing anything yet. But we found out in 2011 or so, 2010, 2011, somewhere in there, that the OPC had appointed a committee. So we, the URC committee, contacted them and said, we would love to talk to you. And so we met with the OPC committee. I want to say it was in 2011 in the Chicago area. Alan Strange is the professor at Mid-America Seminary. He chaired that committee, their committee, and he lives in that area because Mid-America is in that area. And so we met them in the greater Chicagoland area and had just kind of open conversation with them. They were very open with us, and as we came to the end of that meeting, we just said, it really would make sense for us to work together. And our committee thought that was the case, and their committee thought that was the case. And so, so what they did is they went to their General Assembly, bringing that before they meet every year, so they had this opportunity to bring it to the General Assembly ahead of us, bringing it to Synod. So, and I believe it was in 2011 that they did that. They brought it to their General Assembly in 2011, requesting that the OPC invite the URC to join them in a joint work. And the OPC General Assembly agreed to do that and sent then the URC an invitation to work together. And in 2012, Synod 2012, we accepted that invitation. Okay, so I told you I wish it was a straight line from the decision to the end product, but it was a line like this. This is kind of how it went, and this is part of the reason why it took so long. In 1999, we were asked to produce a Psalter hymnal. It was 2018 that it was done and produced. So 19 years in the making. But part of that, I would say, is not because our committee was, twiddling our thumbs. It's because the Synod has sent us in all kinds of different pathways that were difficult. So, again, that's as far as I can go today, it looks like. So, so we are at 2012 and moving at a snail's pace, just like the Trinity Psalter hymnal did. Okay, so we'll get started in just a couple of minutes with our second catechetical service.